Russian manufacturer Arnest Group is taking over 100% of Heineken's Russian shares, along with 7 breweries. As part of the deal, Arnest Group will provide all 1,800 employees with employment guarantees over the next 3 years. Heineken's CEO said the purchase allows the company to exit Russia in a responsible manner. The brewer initiated the withdrawal process in March 2022. A slew of multinational companies were seeking to pull out of Russia after its invasion of Ukraine, but many faced challenges like punitive taxes by the Kremlin. When we come back, beyond technique, classical Chinese dance emphasizes Republican criticism that spam filters are biased against conservatives. In his ruling, the U.S. District Court judge wrote the RNC had not, quote, sufficiently pled that Google acted in bad faith by filtering their messages into spam folders. The judge also wrote that Google was protected under a federal statute that shields internet companies over third-party content they host. The judge gave the RNC a chance to amend the lawsuit. An election watchdog group called Pennsylvania Fair Elections is accusing the Pennsylvania Department of State of violating federal election rules. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the case.
The watchdog group contends that the department is not complying with the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA. This because it doesn't make overseas voters show ID when they register to vote. HAVA is a 2002 law that dictates how elections should be run. It stipulates that the Secretary of State must verify that an applicant's driver's license or social security number matches their official records before allowing them to vote. But the group says that in 2018, the Pennsylvania Department of State said that non-matching numbers are not sufficient grounds to reject a voter application. The watchdog group says Pennsylvania is breaking another election law called the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act. That law lets military and other citizens living abroad vote in U.S. elections. PA Fair Elections says Pennsylvania is sending out ballots to such voters before checking their IDs, which it says is against the rules. Attorney Eric Cardell says progressive groups are pushing Pennsylvania election officials to break the rules. He's drawing attention to the concern about overseas voters who may or may not be citizens deciding close elections. In the past, overseas voters were often called military voters, but the watchdog group says only around 7,000 of the approximately 27,000 overseas votes from Pennsylvania in the 2020 November election were connected to the military. The Pennsylvania Department of State did not respond to a request for comment. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Vetoed an election bill yesterday. The Republican-led legislation would make sweeping changes to the state's voting laws. Here's Cooper explaining his decision.
This attack has nothing to do with election security and everything to do with keeping and gaining power.
The veto is likely to be overridden by the state's GOP-controlled General Assembly. Senate Bill 747 was passed last week. It would eliminate a 3-day grace period for receiving absentee ballots and would extend the period for challenging such ballots to 5 days after the election. The law would also impose new requirements for those registering and voting on the same day, and would allow election observers to move freely about voting locations instead of being confined to a specific area. Republicans argue the bill strengthens North Carolina's elections and helps to prevent fraud. After the break, the U.S. Treasury is estimated to borrow more than $1 trillion in debt this quarter. The national debt is nearing $33 trillion. More in just a moment here on NTD News Today.
For them in terms of tone at the top by our federal government. And when it comes to our federal government and its reckless spending policy, the scary part, though, is that the federal government has a printing press. Your average American can't print more money at home and cover their losses. The U.S. government can, and it does. And it also issues more and more treasury bonds, takes on more and more debt with the public, and sometimes with other countries, and at times with our adversaries. It's very concerning.
So I want to pose this point. You know, if I'm being fair, we're spending a lot, but there's arguments that fiscal spending and injection of liquidity into the economy could actually keeping the recession that we've been talking about since last year, could be keeping the recession at bay.
Okay, so that puts inflation completely off to the side and at all costs prioritizes preventing recessions and so forth. Printing more money, issuing more debt, injecting more into the money supply, our country has shouldered itself with an unfathomable amount of debt that may not sit on the shoulders of current generations, but will sit on the shoulders of generations yet born.
How do we fix this? What are the solutions? Has the ship sailed?
Get rid of the
I think
reckless
the ship
spenders.
might have sailed, but as a country, we can't think that way. We're Americans. We problem solve. That's what we do. But I don't think the problem solves itself. We have to solve it. And the only way we can do that is through honest and prudent discussions about where our money is being spent. It's an issue that I think Americans, per polling from Pew Research and AP and others, are starting to take more seriously and care about. 57% of Americans I saw in a poll care about the national debt as a serious issue. But that's not reflected in the agenda of our lawmakers.
All right, very comprehensive discussion today. Thank you so much for your time, Derek.
I appreciate it as always, Don. Thanks for having me on.
Energy prices go up, the gasoline for their car, the food prices go up, and then on top of that, their healthcare costs go up, both the deductible, the out-of-pocket, as well as the drugs. That becomes a substantial problem for them, and it is on their minds greatly. And let me just talk a minute about what Bernie Sanders is proposing, because when you talk about the cost of drugs, what he is proposing will increase the cost of drugs. And I'll pause here because so the viewers understand, Bernie Sanders is the chairman of the Health Committee in the Senate, so health policy comes out of his committee. He's proposed legislation that would significantly limit what a PBM does, and I'll explain what that is. That's a pharmacy benefit manager. It is the entity that negotiates for your healthcare plan with pharma to get the cost of drugs lower in your healthcare plan. And so it's estimated that a PBM saves each person in this country about $1,000 a year in drug costs.
Understood. And what proposals do you think senior citizens would like to hear from Republican candidates?
So if I were advising one of the presidential candidates or someone in the Senate, I would say you've got to really be focused on the patient and free market solutions to these problems. We want competition, and so we need to have really a modernization of the FDA and the way they handle patents so that drugs can come off of the patent and become generics.
Anne Marie Burkle, thank you again.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Tend to be stolen. Other plans include moving some items behind checkout counters and putting some items behind locks. More companies are trying to protect themselves from shoplifting and organized retail crime. Kohl's said it was using cables to secure products in stores and only offering in-store testing of beauty products. It's also having more staff in fitting rooms and having more workers near the front doors. Target and Walmart have also spoken out about the rise in crime recently. A National Retail Federation survey shows that retail outlets suffered $94.5 billion in losses in 2021, primarily from theft. Speaking of theft, a California man was detained for stealing $1.8 million in luxury items from a hotel room. He then allegedly sold the stolen goods to a Florida buyer. The victims were from Brazil and staying at the Peninsula Beverly Hills Hotel in California for a fashion event. They said they didn't know the suspect, Jobson DeCastro. DeCastro took an Uber to the hotel and allegedly tricked hotel staff into giving him a key to the victim's room. He made multiple Uber trips to the hotel and also charged food to the victim's room account when he ate at the hotel bar. Authorities say he messaged a buyer for the stolen goods over Instagram. The buyer's store was located in Miami, and DeCastro allegedly brought the stolen items there. Authorities tracked him using GPS data from his Uber rides and via Apple AirTags located in one of the suitcases. Authorities also discovered DeCastro is being investigated for a separate hotel theft. It's been over 10 years since Hurricane Sandy wreaked havoc on the East Coast. question of how to best protect the New York-New Jersey harbor from flooding is still under debate. Here's the story.
In the fall of 2012, Superstorm Sandy crashed into the coastline of New York and New Jersey, with a storm surge so massive it ripped homes off their foundations, shattered boardwalks, devastated subway tracks and tunnels, and blacked out lower Manhattan. It took the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers 10 years to produce a protection plan to defend the area from the next such weather event. The Corps recommended a robust and complex system of barriers, flood walls, berms, and levees with a price tag of $52.6 billion. It's the most ambitious plan in the Corps' history. The project is set to go before the U.S. Congress for approval. But a coalition of residents, environmentalists, and climate activists say the plan is focused on preventing the last crisis, not the next one.
One of the biggest problems with the plan is that it started out with too narrow a focus. So when the Corps does a project, they can do a single hazard project or a multi-hazard project. And they started this project as single hazard, only looking at storm surge impacts.
Tracy Brown is the president of Riverkeeper, a nonprofit aimed at protecting the Hudson River and New York's drinking water.
What it needs to be is a multi-hazard plan, because in addition to having storm surges, we have these heavy rain events where we are seeing loss of life and incredible damage to property. We have sea level rise, creating monthly flooding in more and more communities now. So if we don't start with the multi-hazard approach and say this is what we're going to address, we're just going to end up with a hammer that hits one nail. And we have many nails and many challenges.
Some of the proposal envisions walls that might sever New York City residents from the rivers around them. Andrew Krujkovich is with Columbia University's Climate School.
In Greenpoint, Brooklyn, Long Island City, Queens, and then also on the lower west side of Manhattan along the Hudson River, what's proposed are approximately 12 to 20 foot high seawalls. So this will change our experience with waterways, with the coastal areas of New York City, areas that have really brought the city together, both for New Yorkers and also millions of visitors as well.
And the challenges are changing. In September 2021, Hurricane Ida delivered flash flooding in the city and further upstate that killed at least 26 people without a storm surge. Other threats include wildfire smoke from Canada and summer heat waves. Activists say there's still time to change the Army Corps of Engineers' plan for New York, but they need to listen to locals.
So we're at a moment now where our local leaders, the governors of New York and New Jersey, can say to the Corps, we don't approve this plan. We want something different. We want multi-hazards. Let's continue to work on it. Let's partner and get something better.